This is the story of the pursuit of the world's most formidable hackers. Once upon a time, there were 5 distinct groups, metaphorically referred to as bears. They all originated from Russia. Each group possessed unique preferences and methodologies. Yet they shared a critical characteristic. They were profoundly dangerous. There was the fancy bear, known for its elegant, agile, and cunning operations. Then came the lazy bear, content to infiltrate and settle into others' systems, patiently waiting for opportunities. The berserker bear was fixated on energy, all forms of it, and its potential applications. The voodoo bear had mastered a vast array of digital dark arts. And finally, the toxic bear. Certainly not a force to be underestimated. These were all audacious adversaries. Unsettling entities that sent shivers down the spine of the world. Even in the most remote corners, their reputation preceded them, instilling fear. But there was one more thing these bears had in common. Their names were code words. Aliases for specialized units within Russian intelligence services. These units are composed of hackers, some of the most perilous globally. Each unit has distinct objectives: espionage, exposure, or causing widespread disruption. However, their threat extends beyond computers or networks. They pose a danger to Western democracies. They serve as instruments of destabilization, psychological warfare, and political manipulation. They have already breached the German parliament, infiltrating the email accounts of the nation's elected officials. Significantly influenced Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. They operate internationally, working in the interests of Vladimir Putin's government. And for years, they have played a crucial role in Russia's brutal conflict against Ukraine. This documentary uncovers the identities of these hackers, their operational methods, how we can safeguard ourselves from them. This documentary draws heavily from an excellent German-language podcast, Demon Amerikaner, by German investigative journalists Hakan Tank and Florian F. A link is provided. In the description, this narrative commences with a small, diacritical mark above the E and with Claudia Height. At the time, she was working in Berlin as an assistant to a member of the Bundestag, Germany's national parliament. Her office, located in central Berlin, was quite pleasant. It was May 8, 2015, a warm spring Friday, with the weekend fast approaching. She was attempting to compose an email to a colleague named Renee. Annoyingly, the accented RH wasn't appearing correctly. She tried all the usual troubleshooting steps, restarting Word, rebooting her computer. Nothing resolved the issue. The Bundestag had its own internal IT support hotline, 117. She informed the IT specialist that she suspected her PC was infected with some form of malware, perhaps a Trojan, but they dismissed her concerns. At this juncture, no one grasped the true gravity of the situation. Indeed, a Trojan was present on Claudia's computer. She had been hacked, but it wasn't just her device. While she was still on the phone with 117, hackers were already deeply embedded within the Bundestag systems. They were operating on behalf of the Russian military intelligence agency. The GRU, Putin's bears, were running rampant. Directly through the core of Germany's political infrastructure. If this incident occurred today, Claudia could simply have consulted an AI assistant, likely far more helpful than that service hotline. On April 30, 2015, dozens of members of parliament and their staff received an email. It appeared legitimate, seemingly originating from the United Nations. The subject line referenced Ukraine and its economic status. This was just a year after the annexation of Crimea, Russia's initial military incursion into Ukraine. The military operation is now unfolding in eastern Ukraine. The capital, Kyiv, and other Ukrainian cities have been subjected to air and missile strikes over the past several hours. The situation in Ukraine was already a highly sensitive political topic. Staying informed was essential. And when the UN circulated something, Claudia Height and many others clicked. That single click was sufficient. Malware silently installed. Itself in the background, no pop-ups, no warnings. The infection was covert, and from that moment onward, the hackers had access. Their goal was unambiguous: to acquire administrator rights, which were the digital equivalent of master keys, granting access to everything and the power to alter anything. And they achieved their objective. They breached areas of the system that should have been entirely off-limits. This allowed them to penetrate deeper and deeper until they had virtually seized control of the Bundestag's infrastructure. It was a sophisticated operation, meticulously planned and executed. The attackers moved laterally, hopping from computer to computer, searching for valuable information, documents, emails, anything useful. Eventually, they reached machines within a conservative parliamentary office. And not just any office, but Angela Merkel's, was the German chancellor at the time. The Bundestag incident represents one of the most severe cyber attacks in German history. It would trigger a large-scale international investigation and ultimately lead to arrest warrants that had once seemed inconceivable. Yet, within the Bundestag itself, the attack went undetected for a considerable period. Returning to that Friday afternoon call with 117, Claudia was exasperated by the unhelpfulness of the initial hotline call. So she did what most people do. In such a situation, she called again, hoping the next person might actually grasp what was happening. But even the second person on the line failed to take her seriously. Frustrated and fed up, Claudia decided to simply shut down her PC and go home. It was Friday, after all, and the weekend had already begun. On Monday morning, an IT staffer remotely accessed Claudia's machine and reinstalled Word, which, predictably, fixed nothing. By the afternoon, someone finally arrived in person, but even they failed to detect the Trojan on Claudia's PC. By this point, the hackers had already been inside the system for at least 2 weeks. And still, almost no one recognized that this might actually be a spare attack. Meanwhile, in the UK, a cybersecurity firm had been monitoring a suspicious foreign server, one previously used for severe attacks. Suddenly, that server established a connection to machines within the Bundestag network. The firm alerted the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. A day later, the warning reached both the Bundestag's Classified Information Office and the Federal Office for Information Security (BSI) in Bonn. Thanks to German bureaucracy operating as it does, the warning took a brisk 3 days to actually arrive. Finally, someone realized what was transpiring. The BSI dispatched a specialized team to Berlin. Their mission: to meticulously examine the log's automatic computer records that track what occurred, when and how, including which programs were opened, what was clicked, and what ran in the background. The BSI team needed to ascertain 3 things. Was this a significant attack? Yes. What were the hackers pursuing? Likely data theft? And were they still inside? Very much so. The team acted without hesitation. They shut down the entire network. From an external perspective, it appeared as though someone had simply yanked the plug from the wall. Claudia watched her computer power off as if it possessed a will of its own, as if it were haunted. She half expected the lights to flicker. Next. That same day, Der Spiegel broke the story, becoming the first media outlet to report on the cyber attack. Politicians learned about it from the news, not through internal channels. From that moment onward, chaos ensued. Lawmakers were enraged. No one could work effectively, no emails, no access to documents, no reports. And this isn't a film. Can't simply expel the hackers and move on. The network is vast, intricate, and challenging to control. The response team had to navigate it painstakingly, striving to prevent further data theft and regain command. It took weeks to cleanse the system. During that period, MPs and their staff could only utilize specific segments of the network. No one knew if the hackers were still reading their emails. Important notes were suddenly being handwritten again, purely for security. The Bundestag's IT security was clearly overwhelmed and faced intense criticism in the ensuing months. The dust finally settled. The investigation into the perpetrators commenced. And the trail pointed to Russia from the very beginning. On Claudia Height's computer, investigators discovered malware named Extunnel. Extunnel functions like a literal tunnel, establishing a direct, continuous link that grants attackers access to the network whenever they desire. Within the code, analysts uncovered connections to a server believed to be utilized by a group known as a PT-28. A PT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat, a designation for hacker groups that are not only highly skilled but also exceptionally patient intruders who don't merely strike and disappear but remain deeply embedded, sometimes for years. By all accounts, APT-28 is a Russian group also, known by another name, Fancy Bear. Fancy Bear operates under the GRU, Russia's military intelligence service. The group is infamous. This is where they work, in a location known as the Aquarium in Moscow. No one knows their true identities, no names, no faces, not even their precise numbers. But one thing is certain, they will do whatever it takes. They will stop at nothing, not even at the computer of the sitting German chancellor. Ironically, it was in that highly sensitive office where one of the hackers made a blunder. They managed to breach a computer in Angela Merkel's outer office. Her personal machine, her inbox. This was precisely their objective. To extract the emails, one of the hackers developed a custom program. The tool was designed to copy her Outlook inbox and transmit that copy to a server they controlled. The program was named VSC.exe. However, a problem arose. While coding, the hackers made an error. To locate and extract the files, VSC.exe needed to follow a specific file path, and that path included the German word Bureau Office. But the program failed to recognize the German character. Instead, the character appeared as a garbled symbol, a question mark followed by row. Consequently, the program couldn't locate the folder. For a moment, the entire operation stumbled over the peculiarities of the German language. Realizing the attack might be exposed at any moment, the hackers experienced a slight panic. Under pressure, they decided to rewrite the code. This time, they instructed the program to expect German, that they then attempted it again, and this time it worked. The tool successfully copied the inbox and transmitted it. It wasn't Merkel's official correspondence from the Chancellery, but still a significant victory for the attackers. However, the hackers made a mistake, perhaps due to haste or nervousness. In the program's code, investigators later uncovered a critical detail. The hacker had forgotten to delete the name of the computer he was working on. The Federal Public Prosecutor's Office initiated an investigation on suspicion of espionage, and GRU later characterized it as an act of hybrid warfare. But publicly, the German government initially remained silent. No accusations, no finger-pointing. In total, approximately 16 gigabytes of data is believed to have been stolen from the Bundestag network. Though the exact amount remains uncertain, he harbored no fondness for Hillary Clinton, not in the slightest. The two had a history. Back in 2011, Clinton served as the U.S. Secretary of State when Russia held national elections. She publicly questioned the fairness of the vote, and massive protests subsequently erupted across the country. Putin accused the U.S. of instigating those demonstrations. He never forgave her for that. Politically, she had been one of his most formidable opponents for years. Later, the European Court of Human Rights confirmed that the 2011 Russian election was indeed manipulated. Putin clearly favored the other candidate, the boisterous billionaire. Trump, for his part, had repeatedly praised Putin in the past. He viewed Putin as a strong leader, someone he believed he could collaborate with as president. So, Putin consulted with his 3 intelligence agencies and made a decision. 16 gigabytes doesn't sound like much, right? It's just an old USB stick. The message appeared to be a standard Google security alert, mentioning suspicious activity and prompting a password reset. More specifically, spear phishing, as it's customized for a particular individual. Using the same approach, Fancy Bear targeted 300 more individuals within Clinton's campaign. The number of those who fell victim remains unknown. In early April, they pursued another crucial target, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, a central component of the Democratic election apparatus. Employing more convincingly authentic-looking emails, they managed to steal the credentials of at least one DCCS employee. And just like that, they were in again. Once inside, Fancy Bear utilized 2 primary types of malware, exigent and external. The latter is the identical tool employed in the attack on Claudia Height's computer in Berlin. While exploring the DCCC, the hackers discovered something even more valuable, credentials that allowed them to, but Podesta double-checked with an IT staffer at the DNC to be certain. Unfortunately, the staffer replied that the email was legitimate, when he actually intended to convey the opposite. Just one typo with enormous repercussions. Podesta assumed the message was safe, clicked the link, and entered his login credentials on a fake website. That was it. The hackers were in. They now had access to internal communications, emails, and nearly everything connected to the campaign. They were part of Fancy Bear, the same group linked to the Bundestag hack. They stole 50,000 of Podesta's emails. But in context, it's a substantial amount, especially if we're discussing only emails. 16 gigabytes contains an astonishing volume of information. Is that truly the end of the world, though? A little espionage here and there, business as usual? Sure, they stole some files, but what could they genuinely achieve with that? The path read, see user Scaramouche. Scaramouche is a clown-like character from Italian theater. The Clinton campaign would not confirm or deny the veracity of any of the emails posted by WikiLeaks. This revealed the lengths they were willing to go and the sheer amount of chaos a few gigabytes could unleash. People might also recognize the name from Bohemian Rhapsody. That was the hacker's alias, his handle. In secret, Scaramouche and his team became high-priority targets. Then came the U.S. presidential election in 2016. Putin's bears demonstrated their true capabilities. In mid-2015, Donald Trump announced his candidacy. Initially, no one truly took him seriously, but because he was so unconventional, so unfiltered, uttering remarks no one else would dare, the media couldn't stop discussing him. In Mexico, we'll pay for the wall. I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I would not lose any voters. Okay. One outrageous statement after another dominated the headlines. ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He is the founder of ISIS. There was public outrage, disbelief, and widespread support for him. I don't know what I said. I don't remember. By early 2016, Trump was no longer merely the eccentric outsider, who's now the Republican frontrunner, directly confronting Democrat Hillary Clinton. Half a world away in the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin was observing closely. March 19, 2016, an email landed in the inbox of John Podesta, Clinton's campaign manager. The tactic is known as phishing, casting bait and waiting for a bite. Infiltrate the Democratic National Committee, the very core of the party. There, they uncovered detailed documents on campaign strategy, including a file on Trump filled with potentially damaging information. In early May, the intrusion was finally detected, and starting in June, they began releasing bombshell after bombshell. But many experts, like Kathleen Hall Jamieson, concurred that they had an impact. The CIA, FBI, and NSA compiled their findings in a highly classified report. To this day, no one knows for certain what happened to the stolen 16 gigabytes from the Bundestag hack. There's never been a single public leak directly linked to that data. But then again, perhaps there didn't in early 2017. A redacted version was released to the public. One sentence stood out as particularly alarming. We assess that Moscow will apply lessons learned from its campaign aimed at the U.S. presidential election to future influence efforts worldwide. The sheer aggression and skill of these cyber operations, especially in the U.S., opened many people's eyes. They realized this wasn't just spying, it was sabotage. In Germany, alarm bells also began ringing. A federal election was approaching in 2017. What did all of this mean for them? Then a new website emerged, btleaks.com, BT like Bundestag, just like dcaks.com. Suddenly, everyone was on edge. Variations like BTS, Dogo, also began appearing. German authorities noticed that someone was registering these sites, and panic started to set in. Was the world about to witness a repetition of the U.S. playbook? In early May 2017, Angela Merkel traveled to Russia for the first time since the Bundestag hack. She met Putin at his summer residence in Sochi. There she confronted him. Putin insisted that Russia never interferes in the internal affairs of other nations. Merkel replied firmly, I assume that German parties will handle their election campaigns among themselves. A clear warning. Stay out. Russia, to some degree, successfully interfered with the 2016 U.S. election. It is widely regarded as the most effective hack and leak operation ever executed. steal data, release it strategically, and ignite the flames of chaos. The notion of states engaging in espionage against each other is not new. But taking that intelligence and releasing it publicly to deliberately sway an election, that is something entirely different. If hackers can obtain internal data, release it at the opportune moment, shape public opinion, what does that signify for the future of democracy? If a foreign power can disrupt the core of another country's democratic process, that's not merely hacking, that's destabilization. And it's part of a broader pattern designed to erode public trust in democratic institutions. Democracies are at a disadvantage in this struggle. A dictatorship can inundate the internet with state media, bots, fake accounts, and leak operations. Then observe as the public's fear and open society fragment and turn against themselves. Meanwhile, within the authoritarian regime, nothing falters. Dissent is swiftly and publicly crushed. They fabricated a false identity, Guccifer 2.0, a supposed Romanian lone wolf responsible for all the leaks. Guccifer established a blog, reached out to journalists, and offered stolen files. The DNC hack dominated headlines. It became breaking news on television. Suddenly, internal secrets from within the Democratic Party, rumors, backroom deals, tensions were exposed to the public. It was a significant blow to Hillary Clinton's campaign. The emails appeared to show the DNC clearly favoring Clinton over Bernie Sanders, despite their supposed neutrality. There was content regarding her earnings for Wall Street speeches and even alleged anti-Catholic bias. Trump capitalized on the scandal. At a rally, he famously declared, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press." At that point, Clinton was already under scrutiny for her use of a private email server while serving as Secretary of State. The FBI confirmed she had also deleted private emails from that account, which led people to believe she was concealing something. Trump seized the moment, linking that controversy to the deluge of new leaks. That very same day, Fancy Bear sent 76 spear-phishing emails to Clinton's staff. The impact of the leaks on Clinton's campaign was immense. Perhaps not the decisive factor, but they undeniably provided Trump with repeated advantages. What began as chaos transformed into something more focused. A clear effort to aid Donald Trump. Just over a month before Election Day, the hackers handed over John Podesta's emails to WikiLeaks. And then, week after week, those emails were strategically released, some more dramatic than others, but all capturing headlines. The constant trickle of leaked material created a lasting impression. Something questionable was occurring within the Democratic Party. Clinton lost momentum. She was compelled to alter her message and constantly defend herself in the press, and directly against Trump in public debates. The leaks were part of a larger operation. Fancy Bear was supported by a digital army of trolls. For example, operating out of this building in St. Petersburg, they flooded social media with manipulated content and divisive posts. Some even succeeded in organizing real-life protests across multiple U.S. cities. The DCCC and the DNC hired a cybersecurity firm to cleanse their systems. A process that would extend all the way into October, but the Democrats should have discovered the hackers much sooner. In a small, unassuming office in Moscow, another group of hackers was quietly at work. This group is known as Cozy Bear, most likely operating under the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. They had been inside the Democrats' network since June 2015, significantly longer than Fancy Bear. As peculiar as it sounds, Cozy and Fancy Bear were probably unaware of each other's presence. They reported two different superiors, did not communicate, and did not collaborate. Cozy Bear is renowned for its discreet and methodical approach, targeting all manner of institutions without leaving much of a trace. But this time, someone was observing them. In 2014, Dutch intelligence executed an extraordinary hack. They gained access to surveillance cameras within the very building where Cozy Bear operated. They were literally watching the hackers at work. It's how they realized Cozy Bear was infiltrating the DNC systems. Consequently, the AIVD alerted their American counterparts early on. That warning eventually reached the FBI. By September 2015, agent in Washington called the DNC to inform them that Russian hackers were inside their systems, but the warning went unheeded. The call reached lower-level IT staff and was largely disregarded. Senior leadership at the DNC later claimed they were not even aware of it at the time. The hackers could have been discovered much earlier. If anyone had examined Cozy Bear more closely, they likely would have also identified Fancy Bear. And if that had occurred, the summer of 2016 might have unfolded quite differently. But it didn't. Returning to spring 2016, Fancy Bear launched a website, dcaks.com. Hillary Clinton lost. Donald Trump became president. It's nearly impossible to quantify the extent of influence the hacks and disinformation had. Whether they tipped the scales, the United States only comprehended what had transpired after the elections had already concluded. Ultimately, the 2017 German election was not disrupted by any significant leaks. Need to be. Perhaps the information was utilized in some other manner quietly, tactically. Meanwhile, the hunt for Scaramouche continued. It would be some time before his identity was finally confirmed. Some of his associates weren't so fortunate. This is an international body that investigates chemical weapons use and verifies compliance with global conventions. And parked close to the OPCW building. The car's rear faced the compound. The trunk was filled with equipment. Also, 20,000 euros and $20,000 in crisp bills. A conservative-linked NGO was targeted, but the attack failed. In France, Macron's 2017 campaign successfully defended against a similar attack. And in the US, the response was clear and forceful. In 2018, they decided to send a message. That February, the US Department of Justice indicted 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies. They were accused of deliberately interfering with the American political system. Not long after, another sweeping indictment was released. This one focused specifically on Fancy Bear. The FBI precisely detailed how they traced the DNC hack back to individual Russian operatives. Multiple names were listed, all Russian citizens. According to the investigators, they work for Russian intelligence. The hackers remained safe in Russia, no arrests followed. But one thing is clear, much of the world is now off limits to them. And this isn't just about naming names, it's a clear line in the sand. There are boundaries, and these operatives cross them. One name stood out to German investigators. One of the men listed is believed to use the alias Scaramouche, the same alias linked to the VSCXC program. His real name is Dmitry Batin. He is the man who breached Angela Merkel's computer. Today he is 32 years old. Investigators uncovered a considerable amount of information about him. They have photos of him, a young face, dark blonde hair, now shoulder length. He is from Kursk, married, most incriminating of all. A taxi receipt in Mornet's S-bag documenting a ride from the GRU barracks to the airport on the day of departure. The team's devices revealed an even larger mission trail. Serebriakov had been in Lausanne in 2016, likely targeting the World Anti-Doping Agency. Breaking news out of Lausanne, Switzerland, where Russia has been handed a 4-year ban by the World Anti-Doping Agency. In December 2017, he was in Kuala Lumpur, where he reportedly attempted to hack the Malaysian police, the agency then investigating the MH17 plane crash. Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 crash landed in eastern Ukraine. That flight was brought down by a Russian-made missile over eastern Ukraine, and the team wasn't planning to stop at the OPCW. They had train tickets from Utrecht to Bern, Switzerland, likely headed for the spy's laboratory, which was also analyzing Novichok. Sometimes hackers need to get physically close to their targets. Sending phishing emails isn't enough. You need to understand the types of networks in place, the active security measures, and sometimes even observe the people entering and exiting. German journalists have nicknamed them the cleaning crew, because they appear after something significant has gone wrong and attempt to rectify or spin the narrative. For the MIVD, this was a major triumph, and they decided to make it public. Typically, they do not disclose their operations, but this time they held a press conference 5 months later. The 4 men were eventually released and sent back to Russia, likely for diplomatic reasons. Their mistakes seemed amateurish. Why keep that taxi receipt? Well, these aren't mythical hooded figures. They're civil servants hackers, on a schedule, assigned tasks, bad coffee, strict rules. They just happen to work for an authoritarian regime and weaponize code. Russia, of course, denies everything. The men were supposedly just on a routine trip. Of course, nothing screams routine like a flat panel antenna in the trunk. The battery and a voltage regulator powered a computer, which was connected to a laptop in the front. Serebryakov and Moranets used it to execute the hack. The key component was a flat-panel Wi-Fi antenna concealed under a jacket, connected via USB. It mimicked the OPCW's actual Wi-Fi network. Devices inside might automatically connect, believing it to be legitimate. Once connected, the hackers could steal credentials. With those, they could infiltrate the OPCW's internal network. The likely objective, to steal or undermine the Skripal findings, or to discredit the organization through a leak? But they didn't get that far. Dutch authorities intervened. 2 unmarked vehicles quietly rolled onto the lot. Then sudden action. Doors flew open. The 4 men were apprehended. One attempted to destroy his phone, kicking it repeatedly, but failed. The OPCW had just finalized its report on a high-profile case. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were found unconscious on a bench in Salisbury, UK, after being poisoned with Novichok, a nerve agent developed in Russia. The OPCW report confirmed the British findings. Minin scouted the location. He photographed the OPCW building in the Marriott Hotel next door. 2 days later, April 13th, the group planned to strike. Time was short. What they didn't realize was that they were under observation. From the moment they entered the country, they had been under surveillance by the Dutch Military Intelligence Service. For the original version of this documentary, we interviewed a senior MIVD official. Due to rights restrictions, we had to remove those segments from this adaptation. He could unhelp but grin when describing their transport, a rather small car for a group of men tightly packed inside. The agency followed them closely, but how did they even know to look for them? Apparently, the MIVD received intelligence that members of a PT-28 would be flying in Fancy Bear again. According to The Guardian, the original tip may have come from British intelligence. April 10, 2018, a passenger plane from Moscow landed at Schiphol Airport in the Netherlands. Among the passengers were 4 Russian men. They appeared to be typical business travelers. Alexei Menin and Alexei Sutnikov, both in their 40s, seemed cheerful. Behind them walked 2 younger men, Yevgeny Serebryakov and Alexei Moranets. According to their passports, they were diplomats. A sharply dressed man from the Russian embassy met them in arrivals and escorted them out of the airport. But they weren't there on official duty. They were part of a special unit trained to conduct covert foreign operations. Minin and Sutnikov handled reconnaissance. Serebryakov and Moranets were the hackers. They rented a small car and drove to The Hague. They stopped at an electronics store to purchase a heavy-duty 12-volt battery and a charger, then checked into a hotel. The following day, Minin proceeded to the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. April 13th, the operation commenced. The 4 men drove to the Marriott Hotel, then came the search. There was a plastic bag filled with trash from their hotel room. Beer cans, receipts, a half-hearted attempt to cover their tracks. This peculiar hotel parking lot escapade highlights something important. Putin's bears can be thwarted. Germany has repelled them. Reportedly has a daughter, and lives in a town just south of Moscow. He listens to music while he works, shun rock, techno. According to forensics, he even streams football matches while hacking. He is a big fan of Cristiano Ronaldo. Apparently in many ways he seems like an average guy. He is riding the metro. But he is a government hacker, serving a regime that targets Western democracies. In May 2020, the German federal public prosecutor also filed charges against Baden. After the initial wave of indictments in 2018, Vladimir Putin sat down with NBC for an interview. There he was confronted with the allegations. The invasion, long looming like fog, has commenced. Ukraine is assaulted from 3 directions. Missile strikes, commands are shouted. And amidst the chaos, a terrifying thought spreads. What if the communications go down? What if the command dashboards fail? Surveillance feeds cut to black. The Viasat attack was a highly effective cyberstrike, perfectly synchronized with the invasion. But for Ukraine, it was not a new experience. Ukraine has been in Russia's cyber crosshairs for years, not just since the 2022 invasion, dating back to 2014 after the annexation of Crimea. That year, Russia attempted to hack Ukraine's elections. In 2015 and 2016, Voodoo Bear disrupted parts of the country's power grid, each time for hours. In 2022, they tried again. This time, they failed. Russia often tests tactics like election interference in Ukraine before deploying them elsewhere. That's why Ukraine is sometimes referred to as Russia's cyber test battlefield. The war has now been raging for over 3 years, and all of Putin's bears are involved. They attack government systems and major companies. They spy, they leak, they fuel disinformation campaigns. But Ukraine, it seems, is defending itself formidably, not just on the ground, but also in cyberspace. And they are not alone. Today, the country is supported by several leading Western cybersecurity firms. 13 Russians and 3 Russian-owned companies have been indicted by a special prosecutor named Robert Mueller in the United States for interfering in our election. Hakan Tanriverdi is one of the journalists we interviewed for this video. Not long ago, a colleague of his received a mysterious leak, a batch of internal documents from a Russian company called NTC Vulcan. It supplies Russian intelligence services and the military with all kinds of cyber weapons. And their internal documents are chilling. Among other things, Russia appears to have been mapping out what to do once a territory is conquered, how to subdue it, dismantle it, reshape it. Beyond that, they are experimenting with control over foreign critical infrastructure. For example, they are testing if they can slow down trains. If you can slow down a train, well, then you can speed it up too. One thing is certain. We haven't heard the last of the bears, not by a long shot. And in the years ahead, we'll have to remain vigilant. Learn to identify their traps, their tricks, their carefully laid bait. Because once they're inside, it rarely ends well. A cold night in Moscow. The day has barely begun. He's a little on edge. He lights a cigarette. He works for the GRU in the aquarium. He's part of Unit 74,455, better known abroad as Sandworm or Voodoo Bear. At his desk, he pulls up a chair. Time to begin work. Why would you allow an attack like this on the United States? Why have you decided the Russian authorities, myself included, gave anybody permission to do this? Viasat's technology is renowned for its reliability, especially in remote areas. Suddenly, his devices begin to light up with automated warnings. They are originating from Ukraine. 2 of Viasat's ground stations are under attack, inundated with malicious data packets. Internet from satellites doesn't actually originate from space. It's routed through ground stations. If those crash, nothing gets through. And now they are overwhelmed, so overloaded that they cannot deliver connectivity at all. But the Voodoo Bear operative in Moscow isn't finished yet. These types of attacks can sometimes be fended off, but this one continues to escalate. Internet providers typically have remote access to their customers' modems. That's how they push software updates. That access, of course, should be highly secure. In Viasat's case, it wasn't. Voodoo Bear had already infiltrated months earlier. The hackers send a command to the modems, forcing them to download malicious code that erases login credentials stored on the devices. Without those credentials, the modems cannot authenticate, cannot connect, and go completely offline. The attack spreads rapidly. The senior manager stares at his screen in disbelief. 30,000 modems across Europe are now nothing but a waste. In Germany, 5,800 wind turbines go offline. In a small village in Sweden, the internet vanishes. And in Ukraine, Viasat's biggest customer is the military. If the 13 Russian nationals plus 3 Russian companies did in fact interfere in our elections, is that okay with you? I don't care. I couldn't care less. Putin's bears were never apprehended. Their operations were not dismantled. This is not a story with a clean, satisfying conclusion. Quite the opposite. February 24th, 2022, a quiet man heads to work earlier than usual. At Polazovskaya station, he disembarks. From there, it's a 10-minute walk. He and his colleagues have spent months preparing for this moment. Now it's just a few final clicks. Meanwhile, in Austin, Texas, it is still February 23rd. A senior executive at Viasat, satellite internet provider, is just settling into his evening. Suddenly, across Army installations, there's tension. Communication infrastructure is being hit. Ports flood in from the borders. Russian troops and armored vehicles are pouring in. Putin's bears are still active, as dangerous as ever.